Managing Violence podcast bonus show with Ron Amram. That's right. Not a typical show today. I am giving you some bonus content. Didn't advertise this, didn't plan to do it, but I had a chat with my good friend Ron, and it was a good fun chat. We recorded it, and now it's a show. So not only is this a bonus show, but I've also included the bonus content of the bonus show that is normally only available for Patreon contributors. I've made it free for this episode for you to get a bit of a sample of it. So if you like it, make sure you head on over to www.patreon.com/managingviolence and you can hear the bonus content for all the other episodes from season 4 and 5. I know you are eagerly awaiting season 6, and I have an announcement that is coming up as scheduled, and the very first guest of season 6 will be the legend himself, Mr. Paul Vunak. So make sure you don't miss out on that one. Here is my bonus chat with Mr. Ron Amram. I'm joined here by Mr. Ron Amram, return guest from season 1. We last recorded in the worst audio conditions in the history of the show. We recorded in my garage of a house I just moved into with zero soundproofing, zero audio dampening, and there was ice cream trucks and motorbikes. Go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear what a good conversation with bad audio sounds like.
It was an authentic experience. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Be authentic, yeah. We seem to have a barbecue in the background. It would have been all good.
Yeah, that's right.
Ron, so Ron is one of the head instructors at KIA, which is the Combat Arts Institute of Australia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
He's also a black belt in Gendai Krav Maga, black belt in Jisen Budo, black belt in Filipino martial arts as well.
No, I've got a black belt in Dansanuru Jiu-Jitsu. I did Filipino martial arts I've been doing it for a good 15 years, but never actually graded in any system.
Okay, cool. So he's been around a bit. But what we're talking about in this particular episode is, if you want to know more about Ron's background, we cover that in the first episode. So feel free to dig back into that one. But what we want to talk about in this particular chat is how we can maximize managing violence and our skill development and our attribute development during a time of social distancing. So Ron's got a pretty unique view on this, a very resilient view. If you want to steal that quote from Dr. Gav Schneider, and it's really cool to hear what he has to say on that. So, Ron, how do we approach managing violence in an era of social distancing when training opportunities are limited?
Cool. So I think there's a couple of ways or a couple of perspectives we can take. So we can look at it from the perspective of a school owner, which is, where I kind of started, and then the perspective of a practitioner or individual and how those two connect. Now, if I can actually go back to the episode that you and Gav did a little while ago, the second episode with Gav Schneider, was really excellent in the discussion on resilience. And there was a really interesting discussion that you guys had about online training. So it's kind of a segue into some of the other stuff, but I think it is important to mention that adopting a resilient approach in this era is really important to survival. So in the context of a school owner or somebody who teaches managing violence management skills or self-defense skills for a living, obviously our ability to derive income has been impacted. And same thing for anybody who teaches martial arts or combat sports and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we did at KIA was we actually thought that given the risk that COVID poses and the rate at which it was spreading in Western Australia at the time, and taken into account the safety of our members and our staff and our instructors, as well as just our reputation as a business, we felt that it's actually important to close the gym down, and that was well before the government restrictions came in. But the flip side of that, if we look at the resilience approach, is that actually gave us enough time to look at alternatives for delivery. So by the time the government restrictions actually came in, that meant, we couldn't run the gym couldn't open the gym at all. We had already had our CRM, our, customer client relationship management software, all tweaked for online training. We had the platform set up. We had informed all the members of what was happening. We had run several online training sessions as like little experiments to see what would work and what the format would be. We had time to brief all of our staff on how to go ahead. So by the time everything actually kicked in, we're in much better position to bounce back stronger. And that in mind, we actually fared relatively well compared to some other places that unfortunately did not. And I'm sure we've all seen a lot of martial arts schools and self-defense schools that have gone under.
It's I think there's so much benefit. We always talk in managing violence and self-defense about being first. You don't want to be proactive. You want to see the threat. You want to identify the threat and either avoid it or take measures to at least mitigate the risk. We talk about that ad nauseum, and yet so many of us, from a business sense, didn't see this coming. Kind of lived in denial for a crucial week or two. And then still kind of put our head in the sand and just complained about it rather than figuring out how to stay operational. And that's not on anybody. I mean, depending on what your skill set is, depending on what your mindset is, depending on where you're at with your resourcing and so on, and your personal life and like all sorts of different things. There could be various reasons, but that's just like getting into a fight, isn't it? There's a lot of other stuff going on.
100%. So if we're talking about the concept of situational awareness and vigilance, which is key to being able to successfully defend yourself or prevent violence from happening to you. One of the sentences that every self-defense or violence management instructor should say quite often is that idea that, saying to yourself, this will never happen to me, is probably the worst thing you can do. And, well, we've seen a lot of people do that during COVID. It won't happen here. It won't happen to me. It'll just be a hiccup. It'll only last a week. It'll last 2 weeks. It'll be okay.
Yeah, well, this isn't my fault. I shouldn't be in this situation. Like, none of that helps
100%.
in the moment. Like, it might be true, but it doesn't help in the moment. And what you said there, like, you guys saw this coming. You saw a potential risk. You pulled the pin early, which I guess if we're going to keep the self-defense analogy going, you saw trouble on the horizon. And you decided to detour into a better location, so that if you end up getting into a fight, at least you're not in an alleyway with no way out.
100%.
Or maybe you detoured and got some weapons and came back. I'm not sure, depending on which analogy works best for your situation.
Absolutely.
And then by the time the fight did come, you guys were more prepared.
Yeah. So so that worked well for us. And again, I understand that maybe for combat sports gyms, that might be a little bit harder. It is harder, especially I think if you're a grappling based system, which is, with striking, you can still play around and do a lot more. Grappling is much harder. But, so I just think it's worth mentioning the online stuff, because I do think there's still a lot of value to that, to self-defense training and violence management training. And I'll get more on that in a bit. So I'm a big fan of, yes, online training is, not a replacement, but it's definitely the best we can do in a bad situation, and we should take advantage.
Yeah. So just before you move on from that, I just wanted to throw in there, as a grappler, when I really fell in love with grappling was actually, so I was 17. I had just started judo after a couple of years of wrestling, and my first judo tournament, I tore my ACL, and I had to have a knee reconstruction. I was out of action for a year, and in that year, I could not train at all. And look, to be honest, I didn't rehab it as seriously as I did the next time around when I was actually more of a grown athlete. But I couldn't train for a year. And I spent that entire year reading judo books. And before that, judo was a hobby to me. It was just something that I did because there was more competition outlet than there was in wrestling where I was. But reading about the history and the philosophy and the great competitors and the great champions and about all the cool stuff that goes on behind the scenes in martial arts, that's what actually made me fall in love with it as an art. And so it was actually the time away from the mat that by the time I was able to train again, I didn't want to wrestle anymore. I just wanted to do judo because I'd fallen in love with the philosophy of the art. And I think there's so many of us that get so fixated on just doing the physical that we actually neglect. There's so much more to what we're doing. Even if we're not training just for self-defense, even if we're just doing combat sports, there's so much to
100%.
learn. There's so much potential to be unlocked there. I was having this conversation actually with a coach, a sports coach, a football coach, and we're talking about how, like, at the highest level of sport, and we're talking about AFL. Not that I'm much of an AFL guru, but we're talking about AFL, and we're saying, like, between the highest performing teams, so sorry for international audiences, it's Australian rules football.
Yep.
Just picture like soccer, but in the air, and you're allowed to hit people.
That's actually pretty accurate.
As good as I got. Sorry, I got sidetracked. But we're talking about, like, between the highest performing team and the lowest performing team, if you took the athletes themselves and you measured their pure athleticism, you would not find a whole lot of points difference between the athletes in the best performing teams and the athletes in the lowest performing teams. Because if they made it that far, they're being paid a lot of money to be professional athletes. They are really top 1% of humanity in terms of their athleticism. Look at the NFL, the exact same thing. I mean, if you play in the NFL, you are a freakish athlete, whether you're playing.
I think the same would apply to most, high-level sports.
Yeah, exactly, right? So what separates them? It's what goes on between the ears. It's culture, it's mindset, it's psychology. It's whether they can tap into that innate athleticism. And all that can be done away from the field or away from the gym.
Exactly right. So, and let's tie that back to self-defense, So one of the things we talked about actually in the previous podcast, and I know that you had it on your website as well, you had this really nice pyramid discussing what are the most important things for surviving a violent altercation, right? And the most important thing was your mindset. And I'm 100% supportive of that. Like if your mindset is not right, doesn't matter how strong you are, how fit you are, how skilled you are, that's not going to make a difference. And mindset is definitely something you can work on away from the gym. But one of the other elements in the pyramid that was really, really important was your physical attributes, right? So if we distinguish, let's say, between attributes and skill, right? The saying that I often use is that all else being equal, attributes trump skill. Right? So if I look at myself, right, I'm 37, I'm COVID weight, 82 kilos, right? Probably 4 or 5 heavier than I need to be. But we take two 37-year-old, 82 kilo versions of Ron, right? One is, no technical capability whatsoever. When I throw a punch, it looks like I'm bowling or swimming or what have you. My posture is all over the place, got no skill, but I am fit, I am strong, I am fast. I don't care if I get hit, I keep going. I'm mentally sharp, I'm fearless. That's great. You look at the other version of Ron, which is, maybe technically amazing. Every punch is picture perfect, every kick, throw, stab, whatever is picture perfect. But, weak, unfit, cowardly, slow. My money is on the first version, 99 times out of 100, right? Now, that is absolutely something you can still work on regardless of social distancing or being in the gym, right? So to get fitter and stronger, equipment is a bonus. You can do that without it, right? There's absolutely 100% positively things that you can do to improve your survival chances by being physically better, right? So being the best version of yourself from a physical standpoint will never harm your chances in self-defense. And I don't think anybody has ever survived a violent encounter and said, that was too easy, or, I was too fit, I was too strong, I was too quick. I wish it was harder, right? Like, it doesn't happen.
No one's ever got out of a fight and gone, man, I just did too much conditioning for that fight.
100%.
I've never heard an athlete say that, ever.
100%. Now, if we think of this even more in the context of COVID, right? Being physically fit also boosts your immune system, which is great when you're in the middle of a pandemic, right? A lot of people have been dealing with, issues regarding of mental health because of stress and isolation and all that kind of stuff. Being fit helps you manage all that stuff better. So, and if nothing else, if it just gives you a better chance of physically dominating somebody or not being dominated by somebody else, great. If nothing else, it means you can run away faster. Perfect.
100%, man. Like, I've had this conversation with a few people. I don't recall if I've done it on the podcast or not, but I mean, if your physical fitness training for self-defense, and I'm using air quotes for self-defense, doesn't include the ability to climb something, to scale something, to lift a body. I mean, if you train your whole life in martial arts because you want to protect your family from the worst case scenario, but you're not strong enough to carry your kids out of a building that's on fire, or you're not strong enough
100%.
to drag your spouse. And I say this to ladies all the time that don't see a purpose in strength training. It's like, well, are you strong enough to drag your husband unconscious 20 meters around corners out of a building that's on fire and put him through a window if you have to? Like, are you strong enough to do that? Because if you're not, that's going to be the worst moment of your life.
100%.
And there's no way of getting around that. That's it. If that's the only reason to train, then that's a reason to train. I mean, I look at so many martial artists like, I'm just, I only need to hit him once. Cool. What happens next? Like, what happens when he's got friends? How do you make an escape when you haven't run since primary school?
Yeah, or even worse, I'll just shoot him.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that works. So
that's the next question.
Pardon?
If that's your response, and my question is, are you fit enough for prison?
Yeah, that's right. Now the other element of that is even just in terms of target hardening and victim selection. Are you going to pick on the person who looks like they can handle themselves physically, regardless of whether they know like they can kick a punch? If you got somebody who's a physical specimen, right, a lot more intimidating than somebody who's obviously an easier target because they won't give you a problem physically.
Yeah, there's a psychological basis for victim selection, and there's something to do with it was ages ago that I read this article, so forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, but it was something to do with forearm size and neck.
Yeah, right.
Something like evolutionary. I mean, forearm size meant that they'll probably have greater grip strength. They probably, if you get naturally big forearms, it's probably because you're swinging a lot of heavy stuff around.
Yeah.
Or you're swinging from trees a lot, which I guess is probably makes you a hard target. And like neck size and yoke size, so that's like your neck, shoulders, traps.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at someone now who's got big forearms and big traps and big neck, and you go, dude's probably hard. Like it's not, they're not muscles that you accidentally develop.
Absolutely.
Unless you're doing some pretty difficult stuff.
Yeah, for sure, man. Now, another point of looking at that is you can kind of break, and, I'll take a detour into the martial arts. We know it's not the same, but whatever. Essentially with martial arts, you can look at it as almost three levels of mastery, right? So the first level of mastery in martial arts is mastering your own body. Then it's mastering somebody else's body. And the highest level, which is maybe a bit more esoteric, is mastering somebody else's will, right? Or intent. But in the context of self-defense, that could be more the pre and post stuff that we always talk about. Now, if you can't even get your own body to do what you wanted to do, how can you get somebody else's body to do what you wanted to do? Right? So this is absolutely a time when you can work on that. And in terms of mastering somebody else's will, which is the pre and post stuff, it's also a time that you can work on that. So like the process that I have gone through for myself and for the school that we go through, once you decide on a training outcome, the physical training at least becomes a function of three things, right? So you look at the technique that you're looking to develop, and we know that that's the least important element of self-defense, right? Like it doesn't matter what techniques there's a whole bunch of stuff that's considerably more important. But if we look at technique, what you do and how you do it. So how do you throw, how do you punch, how do you roll, how do you kick, how do you do whatever. The training methods that you use to develop that, so that could be, kata or shadow sparring or pattern drills or bag work or sparring or rolling or scenario testing or pressure testing or what have you. And then the training equipment that is available to you, right? So, for example, grappling on mats is very different to grappling on cement. And punching somebody with 16-ounce gloves is really different to punching somebody with MMA gloves, which is different to punching somebody bare knuckle. Right. So the technique, the training method, and the training equipment all affect, how we train for a particular physical outcome. Now, I'm a spreadsheet kind of guy, as you know from our work together. For me, what I did was literally put all that stuff in a like columns. Okay, what do I have available to me? What do I not have available to me? And try and mix and match those different elements in a way that can make sense without having partners to train with. So a couple of examples that I found have worked really well for me is I'm a really big fan of shadow sparring, not shadow boxing to say, but shadow sparring. So with a particular outcome in mind when you do it, which is essentially just visualization, right? So you mentioned before, when you had your ACL surgery, you're doing a lot of research on the history and background and culture of judo. And for me, my experience was, I'm really passionate about boxing. I'm not an amazing boxer, but I really love it. Some of the best times I actually improved in boxing was when I've had very bad injuries to either one of my arms. Like I've broken my right arm badly twice, my forearm, and I torn my ulnar collateral ligament in my left elbow almost clean off in a BJJ comp a few years ago, which obviously limited how I could train. But what I found was that because I couldn't spar and I couldn't do anything with hard contact, I spent a lot of time staying at home just visualizing drills. So going, okay, how would I spar with a particular opponent with a particular mindset and attributes? So let's say somebody who's tall, who's got long reach, who likes to fight on the outside. How would I fight? How would I approach it? And I would very, very slowly shadow spar that. Now, exactly the same thing can be applied to self-defense scenarios, all right? So as a particular scenario where maybe your arm is broken and work through what you can do with one arm. Maybe imagine that you've got an issue with your foot, so stick a couple of pebbles in your shoe, go outside and practice what you can. Put yourself in positions where you're purposely off balance or in an uncomfortable posture or situation, and mentally and visually and then physically rehearse those solutions. What I found when I actually got back to training after those, I was actually almost ahead instead of having moved back. Maybe I haven't improved as much as if I would have trained the whole time. Yeah. But considering the fact that I still improved, even though I couldn't, like my sparring improved, even though I couldn't spar, I think that's a testament to the results. And I think there's a ton of research that actually supports that.
Oh, absolutely, man. There's so much research for visualization and like proper, I mean, real intense visualization where you are walking through things in real time, firing the same same synapses and getting the same movements happening. It's pretty crazy what you can achieve without breaking a sweat. And you can even like change your heart rate. Like there's so many things that can happen to mimic the real thing. And what you're saying makes so much sense. I mean, if you think about like for the average person who might, a serious, quote unquote, serious martial artist who trains, let's say 4 days a week, 2 hours a night for so 8 hours total. Like, what are you doing in that time? I mean, realistically, 8 hours. So let's say an average 2 hour session, you might do a half an hour of fitness. By the time you do your warm up and some fitness drills, you might do half an hour of technique where you're actually learning something or you're practicing something you already know. You might do a half hour of drilling or rolling or some sort of controlled scenario, depending on what style you're doing. And then you probably got another half hour of miscellaneous, getting water, listening to corrections, whatever, right? So that's probably what you're doing, right? So maybe an hour and a half of focused training in amongst that 2 hour period, which is great. If you were at home and you did a half hour of hard fitness, whether it's just a run or whether you do calisthenics or whether you use whatever equipment you've got, you're good for fitness. If you spend half an hour visualizing your movement or practicing your movement as best you can, if you've got solo drills, and everyone's got solo drills, I'm talking to you grapplers, right? We all know there's solo drills. We hate doing them because it's not as much fun as choking people, but
100%.
You've got solo drills. You can do it, and there's heaps of improvised exercises for whatever your style is that you can do. So let's do it. Throw another half an hour in there, and then you actually read a book about your style for half an hour or an hour. You've probably actually achieved more in that 2 hour period at home than what you would have done in class, because you've had to
you saved yourself travel time, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's no reason necessarily to go backwards. Obviously, if you're a high level BJJ competitor, there's no substitute for rolling. Your cardio is probably still going to be a little bit down. You're still going to, you're still going to be a little bit slow, but that's going to come back super fast.
Absolutely. So if we go to, one of the things we talked about last time which is funny because it wasn't until I actually listened to Matt Thornton's episode, which was fantastic, and I checked out all of this stuff. I did the concept of aliveness, and I think we talked about, and I just said, resistance and contact and unpredictable responses. I didn't even know about Matt at the time. It just kind of made sense to me, and then I was kind of, that guy says exactly what I meant, except he says it much better.
Yeah. Isn't it annoying with someone who's so much smarter than you, just like has your ideas?
100%.
Well,
at the moment, we might not be able to train alive. I'm doing finger quotes as well, right? But that's not to say the training is not of value. And again, if you visualize properly, so again, like you said, sit down, close your eyes, go through the scenarios in detail, try and involve as many of the senses as you can. And be realistic about it. So there's a difference between visualization and daydreaming. They're not the same thing. Effectively visualize, you're actually still getting some form of alive training to some extent. Obviously, it's not the same as the real thing, but you're still going to get, like you said, the benefits. So I guess the other challenge with that is, how do you do that in an online training when you're running a session for somebody else? And that can be difficult. A couple of things that we've found that have worked for us was, the first one was we did a lot of research on actual visualization, and then had discussions with our members around the benefits of doing that. But there's absolutely, it feels a bit weird the first few times, but actually running through visualization drills with people over a Zoom class, if that's what you can do. All right, everybody sit down, close your eyes. I'm going to take you through something. I want you to start thinking about how that works. And it's like almost like guided meditation, but in a violent context. Kind of the opposite of meditation, right?
That's awesome. Guided violence.
Yeah, that's right. And, it may sound a little bit arty-farty or out there, but for us, that stuff has worked. And what we've seen is, we're fortunate enough that now that we are in Western Australia, we've been allowed to come back to playing punch face, which is great. So the people who have consistently done that over the few months that we were in lockdown have actually come back significantly better than those who didn't. They were able to switch on back to physical training very, very quickly. Their kind of period of adjustment to going back, oh, wait, I remember how this works, was very, very short. Literally from the start of a session to the end of a session of physical training, you can see the difference between those who did it and those who didn't. So quite significant. Now, the other part of that, one of the things that we did when COVID hit was we started running we just call it like Krav Maga theory. So once a week, instead of doing a physical class, we'd all get together on Zoom, we'd pick a topic, and we'd just talk about it. And that can be anything that's relevant to self-defense, Krav Maga. Krav Maga is my system, but it's self-defense and violence management, right? Now, the thing is, we know that any violence management expert, or self-defense instructor, worth his salt, will tell you the same thing. It's all about the soft skills, right? It's all about de-escalation, threatened behavior assessment, situational awareness, de-escalation, use of force, adrenaline management, understanding decision-making under stress, understanding litigation in your area, understanding the repercussions of being in a violent encounter. All those things are absolutely 100% things you can still work on. So we would just pick a topic every week and run through that. And it became so popular that now we've gone back to physical training. We're still running those sessions once a week.
Yeah, I'm finding that with a lot of instructors are telling me that are going back to class, and they're going, you know what, we actually got a lot of value out of some of the other stuff. We're going to keep the online sessions. We're going to do them once a month or something as a special add-on.
Absolutely. So, it's something I do recommend. Now, one of the things we also touched in the last episode, which I'm surprised I remember because it was that long ago, was that, there is that distinction between combat sports and self-defense and martial arts, and anybody who works in either of those three areas still advertises self-defense as a benefit of their training. Whether that's true or not is a discussion for another time. But if you are somebody who is in the martial arts and you do advertise you teach self-defense, this is a really, really good time for you to upskill to make sure that what you're teaching is actually relevant in a self-defense context, right? Now, there's a absolute ton of great online content for that, right? So Risk to Solution have amazing courses on all of this stuff. Rich Dimitri has got the Study of Violence website, which is all free, and it's got amazing content. I actually did one of following the episode with Dr. Meehan. I did some of the Second Sight courses. They were fantastic as well. Like, there's a ton of resources out there that can help you develop these skills. They're affordable. They're great. They're by subject matter experts.
Yeah, literally just go back through the archives of this show, Google the guest, and then go absorb their material.
Absolutely.
That will keep you going for a good year.
At least. Not to mention, this is a really good time to go back and listen to all the episodes, right?
Yeah. And you know what? If you actually contribute over at www.patreon.com/managingviolence, you can even get all the bonus content. Did you know there's bonus content? There's heaps of bonus content.
And it's well worth it.
Back to you, Ron.
I like that. The other thing that you can do, which we haven't done as much of, but has been really great, is look at, we are fortunate. We live in an age, well, fortunate and unfortunate, I guess. We live in an age where violence is often recorded, right? How many videos can you find? Just go on YouTube and look up, real fight. How many hits are you going to get? Like a few million? There are pages and channels dedicated directly just to that, right? So you've got an absolutely incredible research tool that can help you develop your violence management skills and understanding of violence without actually having to go and get into fights, right? Not only that, there's a lot of channels that will actually break down what's going on, and they explain the pre and post stuff, and look at how this guy angles here, look what this guy does with his hands, how he's looking there, what are his feet doing. All these things are really important that that you get access to, that you can't always train unless you get a frontline job otherwise.
Yeah, it's one of the things we've discussed about before, about how important is experience with violence. And look, I have been, I won't say guilty because I don't think I feel bad about it, but I have certainly said in the past, like, if you don't have hands-on experience, you're not as qualified to teach it necessarily. I think there are substitutes for that, but you have to go out of your way to learn. Like, you can't just 100%. Stick to the dojo and go, well, no, I don't have to get into real fights. I don't want you to go get into a real fight. Like, I've had young black belts that have grown up in good homes that want to be really good real-world self-defense instructors, and they're legitimately coming to me and saying, should I go pick some fights so I get some experience? Well, no, because that would be the antithesis of what we're trying to do with managing violence, right? But they feel like they need this extra bit because they've been told that they can't be a good self-defense instructor without it. And it is kind of a catch-22. I mean, what do you do? Not everyone should go become a bouncer. And if you choose to become a bouncer just because you want to get into fights, you're not going to be a very good bouncer, right? You're going to be a liability to everybody. So,
that was actually the reason. Well, let me tweak that sentence. That was the reason that I got into security. It wasn't to get into fights, but it was because exactly that. I trained for a long time, and I just didn't know where else I could look at, like, seeing if what I learned had actually worked, like works or not.
Yeah.
So I got into security, and what I found was I was actually a pretty decent security officer because I don't like fighting and I don't enjoy violence, but I'm not bad at talking to people. And what I found was that all the skills, like the threat and behavior assessment, situational awareness, and de-escalation sharpened to a pretty decent level where I hardly ever had to.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think there is so much now that you can get around that having to have the hands-on experience. I mean, is it beneficial? Sure. I think it's a shortcut. I think you probably learn more from being in 3 fights than you do from watching 300. But
100%.
it depends on how those fights happen too. If you were drunk at the time and all you did was like swing a lucky punch and then got separated by the bouncers in the bar, you probably didn't learn much from that. That doesn't make you a Ninja Death Commando. You probably would have learned more.
Grandmaster,
Yeah. You probably would have learned more from watching 300 breakdown videos. But the point still stands, you can get around it now because there are so many more resources available. You just have to have I guess probably I think the thing that I'm getting off topic, but it's my show, so who cares? I think the thing that the real world experience gives you is a pretty good bullshit filter. I think it gives you the ability to go, you know what? I don't think that guy's actually done it before because I can't imagine that would work.
Okay, so let me interrupt you for a sec. Just so I've got some notes here of a bunch of stuff I wanted to mention, and one of the things that I always get when we get to like talking about online examples is please don't be that guy who would then like post a comment saying, "I would have done X." Like,
exactly, man. Yeah, I've said before several times on the show, if you start your comment with "I would have," I know you haven't been there.
100%.
Because anyone who's been there knows that they don't know what they would have done under those circumstances, because whatever is in that 38-second video is not the whole situation.
Great.
No.
So you got all these resources, which are fantastic. And the other thing which is great is obviously you can find channels that also analyze it, but sit together with your team and go through that stuff together. And one of the other things that I think I wanted to touch on, because I think it's important, regardless of what type of online training you're doing, is social distancing and isolation can take a very heavy toll, especially if you're a person who's naturally sociable, right? And just doing those Zoom sessions and talking about that stuff, if nothing else, you get to see your friends, you get to see the people you train with, you get to see the people you share the mats with. And that in itself keeps you motivated to keep doing stuff, which is incredibly important because the worst thing you can do is to stop. So if we're just tying that stuff together, right, physical training is of paramount importance. You can absolutely 100% still do it. There's absolutely hardly any limitations on that. Maybe if you're a bodybuilder, sure, but for the context of the functional stuff of self-defense, you can 100% still train effectively and improve your chances of survival in a violent encounter by being the best versions of yourself physically.
Yeah, I've actually got quite a number of bodybuilder friends, and I've been watching with interest those that didn't go out and splurge on home gym equipment. How they've managed. And you know what? The guys that just embraced it, and girls that just embraced it, went, you know what? I'm going to go walk with a pack on for 40 minutes a couple of days a week, or I'm going to go learn how to sprint, or I'm going to swim, or I'm going to hike, or I'm going to ride a horse. Or I've got literally a whole bunch of physique and bodybuilder friends that I'm watching them adapt their training, and we're now 3-4 months deep into this, and I can't see a difference in their physique. Like, if anything, and they look healthier, they look happier, and it goes with martial artists as well, right? How many times do you see someone who, especially professional fighters, right? And I'm not talking about your recreational martial artists. I'm talking about people that are in the gym 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. How often do you see them take time away, come back, and they just look like a different person? Because they're not beaten down by the grind of it anymore. And they're coming back because it's fun. Like, you get a professional MMA fighter, and I know you train fighters. I've trained fighters before. Like, they come back, and it's like they've forgotten that they loved it because it became a job. And sometimes you just need a break. You need to do something different for a little while.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So you can still work on that physical element. Now, if we're tying that to, one of the other things that I kind of lost in my notes somewhere, but that idea of survival mindset or a warrior mindset, right? I think there's a few elements to that. One is that idea that, the harder things are, the harder you go. And physical fitness is one of the best ways to develop that. Like, there are very little things that'll get you more resilient and determined and with a stronger mental attitude than going, I'm going to do this. It's going to suck, but I'm going to do it anyway. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like, we full disclosure, Ron and I worked together. No, we didn't. We didn't actually work together the first episode round. No. You weren't on board yet. So Ron and I worked together. We work with Dr. Gav Schneider. So hence we're both mentioning the word presilience because we literally are dealing with this every day.
Yeah.
I did a little exercise when Gav first when I first started getting my head around this term presilience. I I sort of just did a little mental exercise. I was literally, I think I was in an airport coming back from Brisbane. My flight had been delayed like 4 hours. I had all this time to kill, and it was like I was already on the last flight of the night, so it was like the middle of the night by the time I remember.
I actually remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was texting you because you were in Brisbane too. But anyway, I remember doing this little activity going, what would personal resilience look like? Like if we're going to take this concept that we apply to businesses and culture, and what would it look like? And a large part of situational awareness on a personal level is understanding what your risks are. And if I said to anybody, are you more likely to be murdered or have a heart attack? Everybody knows you're supposed to, like, if you're like us, a male in your 30s or 40s, the things that are most likely to kill you right now are traffic accidents and suicide, right? So what are you doing to look after your mental health? What are you doing to look after what are you doing to be a better driver? Or what are you doing to manage your sleep or your alcohol intake or your prescription medication, or all these things that can actually increase those risk factors? As you go up a demographic, let's say you hit your 50s, now you're more at risk of heart disease, colon cancer, a few other bits and pieces fall in there. So what are you doing to look after your diet? At no stage is murder the number one thing that's going to kill you.
100%. 100% right, Joe. And, I think I put out some content the other day, and one of the things I was saying was, risk creates meaning, right? So a lot of the time we tend to focus on what we perceive to be the biggest threat to us, but very rarely is that actually the biggest threat.
Yeah, and it was a really interesting activity, and it was hard because I actually looked at, okay, I've got young kids, right? What is most likely, what's the leading cause of death for young children? And that was pretty hard. Like no parent wants to sit there like visualizing their child dying, but and you know what? The answers are drowning or car accidents. So what am I doing to make sure my kids are water safe? What am I spending 6 to 8 hours a week making sure my kids don't drown? No. So why am I spending that time focusing on, making sure I don't get raped? Like that, which is unlikely to happen to me as a 6'3" male, right?
You are pretty dumb.
Sometimes, but not to make light of that, but it's one of those things that we have to prioritize our time. Now, what I found for me personally was I look at martial arts and training in general, and even this podcast. It's more about my mental health. It's more about my socialization. It's about doing something I love. It's about giving myself meaning. Those things are actually important. That actually gives me more meaning. And that's why I could just as easily abandon reality-based self-defense forever and go do Goju-Ryu karate and practice kata in a waterfall and be just as happy, because the chances of me having to fight someone off with my waterfall kata are pretty slim. But if it makes me happy, then I'm probably more I'm gonna survive the stuff that is likely to kill me, which is depression, suicide, heart disease, cancer, etc.
Absolutely. And like you said, not to make light of a pretty horrible topic, that idea of sexual assault or rape. Even more so a time to focus on the skills that you can still develop that are crucial, that you can use at the moment to prevent something like that from happening to you or your loved ones. The majority of the skills relating to that particular threat are probably still things you can work on right now.
Yeah, and look, I will say I've contextualized that for first world countries. Like it's for me. If I was living in Papua New Guinea, my attitude might be different, right? If I was living in West Africa, my attitude might be different, or my priorities would be different. Not my attitude, but my priorities. Yeah. And look, even just a resilient mindset when it comes to COVID is, okay, you know what? I can't train at the moment, but what are my increased risk factors? We've been quite lucky here in Australia because our government stepped in fairly early with financial assistance, which will eventually run out. So that's going to change things a little bit. But many countries, you now have people that have fallen very sharply below the poverty line. And what happens when you have a large group of people that fall below the poverty line all at once is you end up with a much higher increase of, I need to steal to survive.
Absolutely.
And let's take a look at managing violence. What have I done to secure my home?
100%. So that's a really good segue. So, one of the two topics I kind of had in mind there was, the first one was, how do we actually approach the the actual training for violence management. And I think we covered that in quite a bit of detail. The second part of that was exactly what you said now. As a result of the changing conditions pretty much everywhere in the world, how has my risk profile changed? Right. So, we've seen cases in Australia. Sorry, I'm giggling because it is so absurd. Again, not to make light of a very horrible topic, but people were getting stabbed over toilet paper at the shops.
Yeah, literally.
Right? So probably not something you would imagine was a high level risk going back 6 months. Right. So
yeah, I'll go on record and say I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect like last December that I'd be reporting on people getting stabbed over toilet paper. And
100%.
Yeah, I'm seeing some pretty ridiculous things, but that's up there.
Totally. Right. So we've seen, an increase in overall agitation and aggression pretty much everywhere. Occupational violence and aggression, which is obviously your specialty, you know a lot more about that stuff than I do. But, if you're working pretty much in any customer service area at the moment, chances are you're dealing with a lot of people who are frustrated, angry, and you are the front line for that, regardless of whether what's going on is actually your fault or not. So that's increased your risk profile in a significant way. We look at a lot of increase in domestic violence, mental health issues and mental illness. People are now, there's been shortage of medications in a variety of places, so you might not be able to get access to the support and or medication that you need to manage whatever issues you have. And like you said, in terms of crime patterns themselves, if you are now in a position where you're going, wow, I don't have money, but I got to feed my family, or I got to get my medication, or I got to do whatever it is, you might result to things that you don't normally do. And even for people who are previously engaged in criminal activity, it may have changed your ability to perform your preferred type of crime to gain the resources that you need, which might make you either take greater risks, and those greater risks might come at a greater violent cost for somebody else.
Yeah, and it's not just your risk profile changes, it's the threat actors that change. So previously, I mean, if we went back 12 months, I can guarantee you that there'd be a lot more conversation about terrorism, right? We'd be talking about terrorists, active armed offenders, all this sort of stuff that was topical. No one's talking about terrorism right now, right? Reality is that the people that may not have been a threat to you 6 months ago may be a threat now. People that are good people that don't normally engage in crime, or not serious crime, who are now pushed to the point where they have to make a decision about what's more important, following the rules or feeding their family. Those people are now a different class of criminal, potentially, or a different class of threat that you may not have previously prepared for. And that's something that warrants some consideration. How would that person go about getting what they want from me? Someone who's an unsophisticated criminal but might have skills in other areas, right? We're seeing a rise in cybercrime for that reason.
A lot more Nigerian princesses have
more sophisticated cybercrime without the typos and spelling errors and dear sirs, because people having to be industrious as much as that. You don't want to glorify it, but that's what people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you mentioned, is also that if you are particularly disposed to a particular type of crime, and for the most part, people tend to stick to what they're comfortable with and they're familiar with and is relatively safe in terms of their risk return profile. My background is in finance and economics, so I love the idea of incentives as a result for pretty much, or as an incentive, as a motivator for pretty much anything. Risk return profile is a good way of analyzing stuff like this. So if you are a criminal who is in a particular area, it might be petty theft or something like that, and now your resources have dried up because people are not going out and you're in isolation, you've got fewer targets. If that means you have to hit for a bigger return for the same amount of effort, you might also increase the risk, right? Or vice versa, right? So if your risk of being caught has increased because, places that before were very, very crowded are now not as crowded and you're more easily spotted, if you're going for something, maybe you're going to go for a bigger return.
Well, yeah, and guess what? I mean, we all know that international delivery has slowed down dramatically, right? It's much harder to get things in. Things are taking a long time. Guess what? Also is taking a long time to come. Drugs. right? It's now harder to get drugs than what it was previously because imports have slowed down. There's a lot more restriction on what can come in and what can't come in. Probably a lot more shipments are being stalled or discovered, depending on what's going on. So in that's going to put a different class of criminals that are on edge about what they need to do, how they need to source it. There's going to be squabbles over who gets what supply as well, internally within networks. So things are changing. The crowd is moving.
It's an interesting world we live in. But I guess in the context of actual violence management for the individual, in that particular context, I think the main thing is really just to be situationally aware and vigilant in terms of keeping track of what is going on in your area, being aware of these potential changes, doing some research, and trying to make sure that you can mitigate and protect yourself as well as you can well in advance, by deterrence or what have you, to make sure you're less likely to be selected as a victim. This is also something that, if you are a teacher, this is a good discussion to have with the people who you teach. Violence or crime is changing. Here's how it might change. And here are the things you can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'd be remiss not to talk about resilience without talking about how we can come out stronger from this. And I think one of the things that I've noticed on a personal level is when the isolations, the social distancing, and the various levels of lockdown started to come out, I'd only just moved into my current neighborhood. And I made an effort for the first time in years, really, to go out and actually meet my neighbors on all angles. And I've learned there's people that have been living in the street for 20 years. They gave me a rundown of everybody else who lives in the street, how long they've lived there for, who has medical needs. And we basically just did this from a humanitarian point of view. Like we knew we had a lot of elderly people in our street. We wanted to know if anyone needed help getting to the shops or getting groceries, or if they had support. And if not, obviously, being younger and healthier, we could go and help them. But by doing that, we've actually established an informal neighborhood watch, because now we all know each other. We know what's normal. Like, we wave at each other. We know what cars are normal in the street, what cars are not normal in the street. We are now more prepared as a street. If you take that in a real micro sense, we are now more prepared as a street to do something. I know who the other young people are in my street that I could rely upon, and I know who the weak and the elderly and the ones with small children are, so that if we have an incident, I have business cards and phone numbers for everybody.
100%. Well, we've done pretty much the same thing. I was also very fortunate to find out the guy who lives like one house down from me is A, police officer, and B, served in the army for like 15 years.
Nice.
So it's great. But no, we've done exactly the same thing, and you make yourself more resilient and presilient as a community, but being better prepared to face whatever challenges are coming, which will allow you to get back stronger.
Yeah, I think we have to. And I mean, even just coming back to what you were talking about before with online training, I mean, how many times as a martial arts instructor do you have someone who misses a good chunk of time off the mats because they're sick, or worse, they don't want to miss training, so they come to the school and they get other people sick, right? And that was accepted 6 months ago or 3 months ago even. That was just normal. Like, someone's going to come to class with a cold, and you just like, whatever. Don't get snot on me, haha. And that's pretty much it. Like, we would never stand for that now. Like, that's changed permanently, right?
Not in a million years, yeah.
So that's an improvement. But if you've got the live streaming set up, why not live stream your classes so that if people are feeling unwell, they can stay at home and they can join in.
Absolutely.
That's a benefit straight off the bat. You've already got the infrastructure there. Let's use it.
Absolutely. So, so there you go. So I think, we've got two elements here that we're looking at. The first one is your own training and what you can do with that. The second one is understanding what's going on around you and how you can better prepare for that. Put those two together in terms of violence management, you're probably still coming out ahead.
Yeah, and to complete the analogy from before, you've been blindsided. You didn't see it coming. You're on the ground bleeding, and you've got people kicking you. Are you going to lay there and tell people it's not fair and that you can't do anything because you're injured and you haven't got all the tools on you and you left your weapons at home, or are you going to stick a thumb in an eyeball and fight your way out? Right? That's what we've got to do right now. Start putting thumbs in eyeballs. Find what you can do, get on with it, and stop being such a wuss. Yeah.
And much like the first episode, why didn't we just say that at the start?
Yeah, man, this is bonus content. This is a fun conversation. But cool, man. I think there's a lot out of that. I know we didn't really follow a structure. I know we did. We kind of just bantered back and forth. But hey, this is my time off between seasons. I'll do what I want. If you don't like it, tell Ron.
Yeah, that's right. I'll stick a thumb in your eye.
Cool, man. Do you want to give a plug to Kaya and what you guys are doing?
Awesome, please. So Combat Arts Institute of Australia, we are, I'd like to think of us as the leading self-defense school in Western Australia. I own it together with Sensei Noah Greenstone, who's phenomenal. And we do a whole bunch of stuff, so other than just the pure self-defense, we also have, a former world champion Muay Thai teaching boxing and kickboxing. We've got a gentleman who is a third dan under Damien Maya teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We've got a team of real experts teaching the stuff that they specialize in. And the whole idea for us is to give the guys and girls who do self-defense with us the platform to work on different skill sets in an integrated fashion with real experts in their fields rather than being a jack of all trades. We do a lot of online stuff. We do a lot of content, and I've got a blog on our website, which is caia.com.au, caia.com.au, with a ton of content on self-defense training as well, and also on our YouTube channel as well. So just look up Combat Arts Institute of Australia.
Awesome. And Ron is also the WA State Manager for Risk 2 Solutions. So he's been heavily involved in a lot of our online courses that you've heard me plug over the episodes at r2s.academy. And he's also runs for us SRA. Do you want to quickly give a quick spiel about what SRA is for anyone that we've got listeners in Perth? So if you're in the market for safety training, Ron, what does SRA do?
Absolutely fantastic. Thanks, Joe. So Safety and Rescue Australia, we are one of the oldest registered training organizations for delivering safety and rescue training. We do a lot of stuff in mining and construction. So anything that involves working safely at heights, enter and work in confined spaces, gas testing, atmosphere, a lot of courses that relate to work on mine sites and construction. One of our primary courses that's actually kind of relevant to all the stuff we do here is actually called Safety Leadership. So it's about enhanced decision making in the safety context. We actually do a lot of the personal risk management in that context as well. So the belief is, and I think that's relevant to any organizations or any individual, is that you can't make good decisions as a whole, as a team, if you can't make good decisions on a personal level. And that relates also to your personal safety. Like if you make shit decisions with regards to your personal safety, you can't be expected to make good decisions for the safety of your family or organization or business. And I think those things, those elements of your life integrate. So it's important to work on all three. Awesome.
And you guys are based in Perth, but there's online offerings, and you guys you're actually you're registered to deliver in, I think, in every state in Australia. So if you're interested in any of that, hit Ron up, hit me up. I'll put you in touch, and we can hook you up. All right, Ron. Thanks very much for joining me, mate. I enjoyed having a solid banter, and I'm sure the listeners will enjoy this episode. Until next time, mate. Thanks very much. I'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Bonus content alert. Bonus content alert. Coming up now, free bonus content for you. Back here with Ron Amram for the Magnificent 7 bonus round. Yes, you're getting a bonus round on a bonus episode. That's how much of a bonus this particular piece is.
I call you for not giving enough value.
Yeah, that's right. Question 1. What's your favorite book you'd consider essential reading on combatives, martial arts, or violence? And no, you don't have to say Gav's book.
Cool. Okay, so Gav's book is number 1. Legit, that book is fantastic. So Can I See Your Hands by Gav Schneider is awesome. But probably my favorite book of all time, is any type of book ever, is Zen in the Martial Arts by Joe Hines.
Okay.
That book, I think, has a tremendous and deep amount of content that is incredibly easy to digest. Like he's taken some of the most, complex concepts that you can ponder as a human being and managed to distill them into like 2-page anecdotes that you can like absorb and almost immediately apply. And a lot of them do relate, I think, in the context of managing violence for self-defense to your own awareness and how you interact and behave with others and recognizing threats and stuff like that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I make a point of reading that probably once or twice a year and have for the last decade.
Awesome.
And every time I read it, I find something new.
Yeah, I love books like that. You know what? An underrated book that I do that with is Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Just because it's such a collection of notes, like you never really absorb it all. It's almost like you just like going through a collection of quotes in a way. Like it depends what speaks to you at that particular moment.
For sure.
Every now and then I read and go, man, I can't believe this was written 50 years ago. Like it's
totally.
Yeah.
So that's one, and I think a couple of the other ones that I really dig are Meditations on Violence by Rory Miller. I think, obviously you've had Rory on the show a couple of times and he's absolutely incredible. And I think if you are a violence management practitioner or aficionado or just interested, I think that is required reading. And same with The Gift of Fear by Gavin De Becker.
Those have got to be the I think anyone who doesn't have Rory Miller and Gavin De Becker in their top 5 of books hasn't read them or didn't understand them. For
sure.
And if you didn't understand Rory's book, then come on, man.
100%.
All right. Question 2. Who's had the biggest impact on you professionally or in your study of martial arts /combative/violence?
Cool. So they're all names you would have heard me mention before. There's 3, if you don't mind me taking. I'll be brief, but 3. So Sensei Noah Greenstone, obviously, who I run Kaya with, and Noah was my first real sensei. I've dabbled in martial arts my whole life, but he was the guy who really got me into making it as a way of life. And obviously, we then opened Kaya together, which is also, I think, a huge vote of confidence. For me, it meant a ton that my sensei was like, let's open a school together. I think you're at a level where you're okay to teach this and do that with me, which was great. And I've also learned a lot about business from him. The second is Gav, Dr. Gav Schneider, who's I've known for pretty much since we opened Kaya, actually. And he's also had a tremendous impact on me, both in terms of my martial arts and self-defense development. I think Gav was the guy who really got me going from martial arts to self-defense. And obviously working for R2S now for the last, year and a bit. And Gav is the guy's a genius. He really is in every aspect. So he's been a tremendous impact. And then the last one, and I've mentioned him before, is Master Manny DeMatos, who's, other phenomenal boxing coach and a ton of experience with real world violence, but also very cheeky and has a way of just seeing decision trees unfold in real time, like the what if the what if of the what if of the what if of the what if. It's crazy training with him on stuff like that, and he's the same in business as well, which is really amazing.
Very cool. Very cool. Question 3. What do you think is the most overlooked aspect of violence management or self-defense training?
Pre and post. Hands down. It doesn't have to be a long answer. Pre and post. What happens before, what happens after physical.
Everything except the actual fighting.
100%.
Yeah.
It's sad, but I think it's true. Like, people just don't teach that stuff.
That's the unsexy
stuff.
It's the unsexy stuff.
Agreed.
Yeah. And you can't get a black belt in it. So, why bother? Question 4. Is there a difference between preparing someone for violence and making them a great martial artist?
Yes. Yes, 100% absolutely. If you're just interested in being prepared for violence, you can do that, I think, in a much shorter time than it would take you to become a great martial artist. But at the same time, to me, the two are really well connected. I think that if you're a lifelong dedicated martial artist, then you will hopefully develop a lot of the skills that are related to violence management. providing that you don't have your blinkers on and you're, open to absorbing what's useful. But the opposite is not necessarily true. You can prepare for violence without having the need to become a great martial artist. What I often advocate in the context, and this is really similar to the discussion we had before, was that preparing for violence is one thing, but if your ultimate goal is to make sure you live a long and happy life, then becoming a great martial artist can hopefully tick a lot more boxes than just a violence management one, which will keep you doing that.
Yeah.
So I try and encourage both rather than just one or the other.
Yeah, good answer. Good answer. Question 5. What do you feel are the most effective elements of a successful reality acquisition or stress inoculation program, and how important is this for preparing people to manage a violent incident?
Okay, incredibly important is the short answer. Now, in terms of, I was very fortunate to have done a significant chunk of training with Mike Belzer and Meredith Gold in their, raw power, using the mugger suits, and see how they train it. And they do the scenario and reality acquisition stress inoculation programs really, really well. And I think the main thing with that, there's a couple of elements, but number one is you have to be acutely aware of who your target audience is to make sure you can tailor the program to their needs, because you can very easily do more harm than good. So it's very easy to get that stuff wrong. So you have to know who you're working with, and that's probably one of the key elements to get started with. Then the next thing I believe is, everything in progression, it needs to be gradually introduced, even if that's over a short amount of time. You don't want to throw people into something they're not ready for. So, you have to know who you're working with, and you have to gradually get them to a position where they can face the challenges that kind of training brings, because they are certainly, they can be very powerful, and not always in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, question 6. What do you think is the most dangerous myth about managing violence?
That if you throw a good right cross, you're good.
Yeah.
That's more like, if you just hit hard, or if I'll just shoot him, like that shit don't work, bro. Yeah. And I think that ties to, what was the other question? Question 3 of what is the most overlooked aspect stuff is, the most overlooked aspect is actually tied to the myth, which is if I'm physically capable, then I'm sweet, when there's actually so much more depth to it than just that.
Yeah. All right, last one. Beyond your current legacy, what do you still hope to accomplish or contribute to the martial arts world, and how would you like to be remembered?
Wow. Okay, this one's actually a bit of a challenge, because where I am personally is in a really interesting transition, something that you and Gav touched about in the second episode, which again, I can't recommend that episode strongly enough, is the last decade for me has been seeing myself as a martial artist and self-defense instructor, and that's it. That's been my identity. And, that started when I was 27. I'm now 37. The last 4 years, I've broken more body parts than the ones that are not broken, through training like an idiot primarily. But also a lot of the work that we've been doing with R2S, which takes a lot of this stuff to a greater audience, has actually seen me change the way that I view myself as something more than just a martial artist. And I think in terms of a legacy or something I would like to be remembered as, I'd like to leave this world a safer place than I found it. If I can do that, then I don't even have to be remembered for that. As long as that actually happens, then I can go, then I can go happy. Awesome, man.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Ron.
Thank you, bro.
I know we'll talk again tomorrow, because
yep.
But, it's good. It's good to have a chat in this context with you as well. So, cheers, brother. We'll talk again soon.
Cheers, bro. Chat soon. Thanks again.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Ron Amram. A little bit more laid back, a little bit less interview, a little bit more chit chat with a good friend of mine. Hope you enjoyed it. Plenty of good insights, I hope. We will be back for Season 6 on the 20th of July with Mr. Paul Vunak leading the charge. It's a fantastic lineup we've already got for Season 6. I can't wait to start having those conversations. We've already got a couple in the can. There's some good stuff coming. I'll see you on the 20th of July for Season 6. Enjoy. Stay safe. Talk to you next time.